The stale perfume of desperation and cheap whiskey clung to the air in the dimly lit bar. A scent Liliana Marino was beginning to know intimately. It was the smell of her life for the past 6 months, ever since Julian had decided his love was a cage. Tonight, the cage had followed her here. His voice, a venomous whisper, slithered into her ear, his fingers digging into her arm like talons. You thought you could just walk away, Leah? You belong to me. Panic, cold and sharp, constricted her throat. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, a shield, anything. And then she saw him. He sat alone in a shadowed booth. A king on a throne of cracked leather, nursing a glass of amber liquid. He wore a suit so black it seemed to drink the light, tailored to perfection over a frame that radiated lethal stillness. Power rolled off him in palpable waves, an aura of absolute, unquestionable authority that made the rowdy bar patrons give his corner a wide, respectful berth. He wasn't just a man. He was a verdict waiting to be delivered. In that heartbeat of pure terror, a wild, insane idea sparked in Leah's mind. It was reckless, stupid, and could get her killed. But Julian's grip was tightening, his breath hot and sour against her cheek, and desperation was a powerful drug. Tearing her arm from Julian's grasp, she stumbled toward the shadowed booth, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She didn't slow, didn't hesitate. She reached his table, her hand trembling as she clutched the sleeve of his impeccable suit. His head lifted slowly, and eyes the color of storm-tossed sea met hers. They were cold, ancient, and held zero illusions about the world. There you are, darling, she breathed, the words tasting like lies and prayer. I was starting to think you'd left me. The man's stormy eyes flickered from her face, down to her white-knuckled grip on his arm, and then past her to where Julian stood, momentarily stunned into silence. A ghost of a smirk, sharp and dangerous as a razor's edge, touched the corner of his mouth. He didn't speak. He simply lifted his glass in a silent, mocking toast to her ex, the gesture dripping with a contempt so profound it was an execution. Julian, who thrived on intimidation, visibly deflated under that silent gaze. The predator became the prey. He sputtered, his face flushing a blotchy red, and then with a final hateful glare at Leah, he turned and practically fled the bar. The silence that descended on their booth was heavier than any shout. The man, this stranger, slowly placed his glass back on the table, the soft click echoing in the sudden void. His gaze returned to her, pinning her in place. He made no move to shrug off her hand. Instead, his own hand, large and calloused, came up to cover hers, his touch a brand of heat and possession. A bold move, Passerato, he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through her bones. A little sparrow. But salvation is never free. You've interrupted my solitude and used me as your shield. Now a debt is owed. Leah tried to pull her hand away, the initial rush of adrenaline giving way to a more profound primal fear. This man was a different kind of danger, a deeper, darker ocean than the shallow puddle of Julian's cruelty. I'm sorry, she stammered. Thank you. I can pay for your drink. His laugh was short and devoid of humor. I don't want your money. I own the company that makes this whiskey, the bar you're standing in, and the ground beneath it. Your debt is not so easily paid. He leaned in. His scent a heady mix of expensive cologne, cedar, and something uniquely masculine and predatory. You will accompany me for the rest of the evening. That is my price. It wasn't a request. It was a command, wrapped in the silken tones of a man who had never been denied. He led her from the bar not by the arm, but with a proprietary hand settled firmly on the small of her back, a gesture of ownership for all the world to see. Outside, a sleek black car, so polished it reflected the grimy city lights like fractured diamonds, waited with a driver standing at attention. The door was opened and he guided her inside. The interior smelled of rich leather and power, a world away from her small apartment that smelled of old books and chamomile tea. The drive was silent, the city's neon glow painting his chiseled profile in stark relief. He was Rocco Bastone, a name whispered in fear and reverence in the city's underbelly. The unseen king known only as the Ghost, he ruled the shadows with an iron fist, his empire built on secrets and blood. He was a man scarred by a betrayal that had stolen his family years ago, leaving him with nothing but a thirst for absolute control. He saw her not just as a night's amusement, but as a curiosity, a flicker of genuine fire in his world of calculated artifice. Her defiance was a novelty. When they arrived at his villa, a fortress of modern architecture perched on a hill overlooking the city, Leah felt like she had been swallowed whole. Marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting, and priceless art adorned walls that could have told 1,000 violent stories. A man with graying temples and watchful eyes, his consigliere Angelo, met them at the door. Angelo's gaze on Leah was sharp, assessing. "Rocco," he said, his tone low and cautious. An unexpected guest. Rocco's hand never left her back. "This is Leah." She had a prior engagement she needed to escape. His eyes glinted. "I provided the exit." Riccardo Valli, Rocco's underboss, emerged from a nearby room, a smug smile playing on his lips. He was handsome in a way that felt slick and untrustworthy. "Found a stray, boss?" he drawled, his eyes raking over Leah with insolent appraisal. "Does she have her shots?" In a movement so fast Leah barely registered it, Rocco had crossed the space and slammed Riccardo against the wall, his forearm pressed against the underboss's throat. The air crackled with sudden lethal violence. "She is with me," Rocco snarled, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You will show her the respect you show me, or I will carve it into your skin. Capisci?" Riccardo, his face pale, choked out a "Yes, boss," and Rocco released him with a shove. He turned back to Leah, his expression smoothing over, the storm in his eyes receding to a watchful calm, but the message was clear. She was his, and what belonged to the ghost no one touched. Later, wrapped in a silk robe he had provided, Leah found herself in his library. It was a cavernous room, filled from floor to ceiling with books. It was the last thing she expected. She ran her fingers over the leather-bound spines of Tolstoy and Dumas, a sanctuary of stories in a fortress of sin. He found her there, standing by the window, watching the city lights twinkle like a fallen constellation. He had shed his jacket, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms dusted with dark hair, and adorned with intricate tattoos that hinted at a life she couldn't imagine. "You read," she stated, the words a soft accusation. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "A man must have his secrets," he replied, his voice softer now. "My father believed a man who doesn't read lives only one life. He who reads lives 1,000." This glimpse of the man beneath the monster was disorienting. It was a crack in the formidable armor, a hint of a soul she thought long dead. "He must have been a good man," she whispered. A shadow passed over Rocco's face, a flicker of old unhealed pain. "He was. And it got him killed." The rawness in his voice was a wound laid bare. And in that moment she didn't see a mafia boss. She saw a boy who had lost his father. An instinct she couldn't suppress made her reach out, her hand gently touching his arm. "I'm sorry." His entire body went rigid at her touch, his gaze dropping to her hand as if it were a foreign object. No one touched him with such simple, unadulterated sympathy. His world was built on transactions of fear and favor, not gentle comfort. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and saw not a pawn or a possession, but the woman who had, with a single touch, bypassed every wall he had ever built. The air grew thick, charged with an unspoken current. He lifted his hand, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, his touch surprisingly tender. "Don't be sorry for me, tesoro," he murmured, his eyes dark with a burgeoning, dangerous emotion. "Be sorry for yourself. Because now that I have you, I am never letting you go." The days that followed blurred into a strange, gilded captivity. Leah was a princess in a diamond-studded prison, adorned in designer clothes she never asked for, eating gourmet meals in echoing silence. Rocco was a constant, brooding presence. He watched her with an intensity that both terrified and thrilled her. He never forced her, never laid a hand on her in anger, but his possession was absolute. He bought out the library where she worked, for renovations, he'd said, effectively severing her last tie to her old life. She was his body and soul, whether she had agreed to it or not. The only place she found solace was in the villa's hidden sanctum, a sprawling rose garden Rocco had built in his mother's memory. It was a riot of color and life amidst the sterile modernity of his fortress, filled with blossoms of deep crimson, pale pink and pristine white. He would find her there sometimes, standing among the thorns and petals, and for a few moments, the silence between them was not tense but companionable. It was there that Angelo, the wise consigliere, found her one afternoon. He stood at a respectful distance, his hands clasped behind his back. "He is not a man who loves easily, Signorina," Angelo said, his voice kind but laced with warning. "The last time he opened his heart, it was torn from his chest. This life, it stains everything it touches. A beautiful flower like you cannot bloom in this soil." Leah turned, her chin lifted in the defiance that Rocco found so captivating. "Perhaps the soil just needs a different kind of flower," she countered, her voice steady. Angelo gave a sad, knowing smile. "Or perhaps the thorns will choke it before it has a chance to grow. Be careful. There are vipers in this garden, and not all of them slither on the ground." His warning was prophetic. Riccardo, the treacherous underboss, watched the growing bond between Leah and Rocco with venomous jealousy. He saw her not as Rocco's salvation, but as his greatest weakness, the chink in his armor he'd been waiting for. A plan began to form in his cunning mind. A plan to burn Rocco's world to the ground and use the ashes to build his own throne. He would use the dove to bring down the ghost. Riccardo's treachery began with whispers, carefully planted seeds of discord. He arranged for one of Rocco's shipments to be hit in the territory of the rival Falcone family, a deliberate provocation. He then fed Rocco falsified intelligence, painting a picture of a full-scale assault being planned by the Falcones. Rocco, his protective instincts already on high alert with Leah in his home, reacted exactly as Riccardo predicted, with cold, calculated fury. A turf war, brutal and swift, ignited in the city's streets. Gunfire became the new nightly symphony. But this was only the overture to Riccardo's grand performance. His true target was Leah. Knowing Rocco often sent her with a driver for fresh air, to a small secluded park he owned, Riccardo leaked the route in time to a crew of mercenaries, framing it as an order from the Falcones to hit the ghost where he lives. He envisioned the outcome perfectly. Leah would be taken or killed, and Rocco, consumed by grief and rage, would launch an all-out suicidal war, leaving a power vacuum for Riccardo to fill. The trap was set. The morning was bright and clear when Leah, desperate for a moment outside the villa's suffocating opulence, agreed to the drive. She felt a prickle of unease, a sense that the sky was too blue, the air too still. Meanwhile, back at the villa, Angelo approached Rocco, his face grim. "Boss, something is wrong. My source inside the Falcone family swears they didn't hit our shipment. They're trying to de-escalate, not start a war. And Riccardo, he's been too quiet, too eager for this fight." Doubt, a cold serpent, coiled in Rocco's gut. He thought of Leah, of the park, of the route only his most trusted men knew. And Riccardo was one of them. A chilling realization washed over him. He grabbed his phone, his thumb hovering over Leah's contact, when Angelo's man burst in. "Boss, there's been an attack at the park." It was Signorina Marino's car. In that instant the world fell away. The ghost, the ruthless Don, the king of the underworld, ceased to exist. There was only Rocco, a man whose heart was miles away, trapped in a cage of fire and steel. He didn't hesitate. Grabbing his keys and his weapon, he stormed out, leaving Angelo to rally the men. Omerta codes, family business, it all turned to dust. The only thing that mattered was her. The squeal of tires and the pop-pop-pop of gunfire ripped through the serene park. Leah's driver, a loyal man named Enzo, lay slumped over the wheel, a crimson stain spreading across his shirt. Men in black masks were dragging her from the car, their grips bruising. She fought, kicking and screaming, her mind racing. This wasn't a random mugging. This was an execution, and she was the bait. Just as one of the men raised his hand to strike her, a black sports car screeched around the corner, slamming into their own vehicle with a deafening crunch of metal. Rocco burst out of the driver's side before the car even stopped moving, a pistol in each hand, his face a mask of incandescent rage. He moved with a terrifying grace, a phantom of death weaving through the chaos. Shots echoed through the trees as he methodically dispatched the masked men, each movement precise, economical, and utterly lethal. He was no longer the man who read Tolstoy in his library. He was the ghost, reaping a bloody harvest. One of the mercenaries, seeing his men fall, grabbed Leah, holding a gun to her head. "Drop it, Bastone, or she dies." Rocco froze, his eyes locking with Leah's. In them she saw not cold fury, but pure unadulterated terror. The fear of losing her. In that split second Leah knew she couldn't be a damsel. She stomped down hard on her captor's instep with the heel of her shoe, and as he grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second, she drove her elbow back into his ribs with all her might. It was enough. The man staggered and Rocco fired. The mercenary dropped, a neat hole appearing in his forehead. Rocco rushed to her, his hands framing her face, his eyes scanning every inch of her. Are you hurt? Miyakara, did they hurt you? He was breathing heavily, his suit stained with dust and blood, but his touch was gentle. Just then Ricardo and his men arrived, feigning a heroic rescue. Boss, we got here as fast as we could, Ricardo shouted, his eyes wide with fake concern. But Angelo was right behind him. Don't listen to him, Rocco, the old consigliere said, his own gun trained steadily on Ricardo. My man saw him. He was parked a block away watching. Waiting. The world seemed to slow down. The birdsong in the park returned, an eerie counterpoint to the tableau of death and betrayal. Rocco's gaze shifted from Leah's frightened face to Ricardo, and a chillingly calm expression settled over his features. It was the calm of a hurricane's eye, the deadly stillness before the final devastating storm. All the pieces clicked into place, the shipment, the war, the attack. It was all him, the viper in his garden. You, Rocco said, the single word carrying the weight of a death sentence. Ricardo's mask of concern crumbled, replaced by a sneer. You got soft, Rocco. Her. He spat, gesturing at Leah. She made you weak. A king can't have a heart. I was just taking what should have been mine. Rocco slowly walked toward him, the aura of violence around him so thick it was almost visible. You're wrong, Rocco said, his voice dangerously low. She didn't make me weak. She reminded me what's worth fighting for. My father's mistake wasn't having a heart. It was trusting a snake like you in his house. He stopped directly in front of his underboss. In the old days, Rocco would have made it slow, made it an example. But as he looked at Ricardo, he saw Leah watching him, her eyes wide. He saw the future he wanted, a future not entirely steeped in blood. He raised his gun. For my family, he said, the words a solemn vow. A single shot rang out. It was not a display of brutality, but a swift, cold execution of justice. An ending. As Ricardo fell, Rocco turned away, his back to the past. He walked back to Leah, holstering his weapon as if shedding a skin. He was wounded, a deep gash on his arm bleeding freely through his torn shirt. He stumbled slightly as he reached her, the adrenaline finally fading. Leah caught him, her small frame supporting his weight. The roles were reversed. The captive was now the protector. She held him, her hand pressing against his wound, her tears finally falling, mingling with his blood on the fine fabric of his suit. It's over, she whispered, her voice shaking. He leaned his head against hers, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. No, he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. It's just beginning. They returned to the villa, a silent procession leaving the carnage behind. The opulent halls, once a symbol of her imprisonment, now felt like a sanctuary. In his vast marble bathroom, Leah gently cleaned the gash on his arm. The water ran pink in the basin. He sat on the edge of the tub, stripped to the waist, his powerful torso a tapestry of old scars and fresh ink. He watched her every move, his stormy eyes vulnerable for the first time. The ruthless Mafia Don was gone, replaced by a man bleeding in front of the woman he almost lost. When she was done, she wrapped his arm in clean bandages, her touch deft and sure. You'll live, she said softly, a hint of her old fire returning. He caught her hand, bringing her knuckles to his lips. His kiss was not one of passion but of reverence. Only because of you, he confessed, his voice raw. When I thought they had you, I understood what real fear was. They can take my territory, my money, my name. But they cannot take you, Leah. Non posso perderti. I can't lose you. It was the confession she had been waiting for, the truth that lay beneath all the possession and control. It wasn't about ownership. It was about a desperate, terrified love. She knelt before him, her hands framing his face, forcing him to meet her gaze. You won't, she promised. I'm not going anywhere. In that moment she wasn't his captive. She was his partner. She saw the entirety of him, the ghost and the man, the killer and the lover, and she chose him. She was choosing this life, not for the gilded cage, but for the fierce, wounded heart of the man who ruled it. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, breathing her in as if she were the very air he needed to survive. The blood and the silk, the violence and the tenderness, it all merged into one undeniable truth. They were a dark fairy tale, written in scars and secrets, and she was finally ready to write her own chapter. In the weeks that followed, a new order settled over the Bastogne Empire. Rocco, with Leah as his anchor and Angelo as his steady hand, consolidated his power. The war with the Falcones was ended with a truce built on mutual respect rather than fear. Rocco's rule became less about brutal expansion and more about unshakable stability. He was still a king, but his reign was now tempered with a wisdom and restraint he hadn't possessed before. He was no less dangerous, but his ferocity was now reserved for protecting his queen and their fragile peace. He spent less time in the city's dark alleys and more time in the sunlit rose garden with Leah. She had brought life back not only to him, but to the very soul of his home. One evening, as the sun bled across the sky in hues of orange and purple, he led her to the center of the garden. In his hand he held a single perfect white rose, its petals like flawless porcelain. He offered it to her. "The red roses are for the Bastogne family," he said, his voice soft. "They represent the blood, the passion, the price of our name." He gently tucked the white rose behind her ear, its cool petals a stark contrast against her warm skin. "This one is for us. For a new beginning." Un nuovo inizio, she leaned into his touch, her heart full. She had walked into a bar to escape a monster, only to be claimed by a king. She had been taken captive, only to find a freedom she never knew existed. In his dangerous world, against all odds, she had found her home. But can a ghost truly leave his shadows behind? Can a love born in violence and sealed in blood ever find true, lasting peace? The city below still whispers his name, and new vipers will always be waiting in the garden. Tell me, what would you risk for a love that could cost you everything? Would you choose the safety of the world you know? Or the perilous heart of a king who would burn it all down just to keep you safe? Share your story of epic love in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of passion that defy the darkness.